This is Mainstreet with Gary Allen. Now, here's Gary.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Mainstreet. Gary Allen with you, as I am every Tuesday at 2 p.m. I want to answer some questions some people had for me on Facebook last week. Ron Miguel couldn't be with us last week. We are going to reschedule him. There was an emergency at the zoo. Therefore, the emergency took precedent over him coming on and doing an interview. Saving a life is definitely more important than coming on and doing an interview. So we will reschedule with Ron Miguel, and he's going to be coming back from time to time. He's not only a longtime friend of mine, but he's a friend of the show. So he'll be back with us discussing everything about the zoo. And we've got some things coming up with the zoo pertaining to the veterans we will discuss later as we continue to move forward with this program. We have some great guests coming up over the next couple of weeks, but today we have a very exciting guest, and I will introduce him to you in just a couple of minutes. But there's a few people I would like to thank. First of all, my executive producer, who's also on the program today, Mr. Rick Del Vecchio, my studio producer, Andres, and then Mike will be taking over a little bit later on. I want to thank Michael and Grant Miller for giving me this platform and allowing me to be part of the Miami community. I also want to thank our community sponsors, the Japanese Gardens of Miami, as well as the Elks Lodges of South Florida. I want to thank them for their continued support. My guest this afternoon is a gentleman who has been a commissioner here in District 2 in Miami for a number of years, since 2015. His name is Ken Russell. He is currently running for Congress in District 27. And hopefully he is going to win. That's just why he's on the program this afternoon. He is a Democrat. He has been endorsed by over 5 unions in South Florida. Unite Here, Local 355, the International Brotherhood of the Teamsters, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, as well as the International Association of Firefighters, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. And one of the things that he's very big on is making sure that people who are employed get equal wages. And he just recently was able to deal with the owners of the new soccer stadium to make sure all employees will be getting at least $18 an hour for their employment. And we're going to talk about that because that's something he's involved with, not only helping you, but helping the community. And that's why he's on the program this afternoon. So without further ado, would you please welcome Mr. Rick Del Vecchio and Commissioner Ken Russell. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
How you doing, Gary?
Good to see you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it is absolutely my pleasure. As I said, you are very instrumental, Commissioner, with employment, making sure people get fair wages, housing, the economy, and we're going to go all through that as we go through this hour. But how are you able to get the owners of the soccer stadium to agree to $18 an hour?
Well, it's kind of fun when you're the swing vote. And you're needed for a deal that you're not terribly interested in. This was not my dream project or my initiative or my vision, but that of others. And so I was easy to say no, but what if there were a world where this could be good for Miami? And they said, well, what does that look like to you? And so I started a laundry list of requirements that would need to be met. And this is 4 years ago before we put it on the ballot. I said, in order for you to even put it on the ballot, you've got to meet these environmental concerns, economic concerns, jobs concerns, environmental remediation of contamination concerns. The First Tee Golf program was there. And I have to give them credit. They met every single one of my demands from 4 years ago, and they kept their promise all the way through the lease. It was a little tough in the end. I had to exert a little bit of my swing vote status on the dais to make sure and pull it across the line. But I wasn't willing to budge on a single inch for the city of Miami, and it came through. So the voters approved it, and we did as well.
Well, I'm going to have you negotiate for me with Rick when it comes to raising my salary up here in the not too distant future. I'm only kidding. I've known Mr. Del Vecchio for 40-something years. He and I have been friends for a long time. You came to this country with your mom and dad who left Cuba. You're not Cuban, but your father lived in Cuba for a number of years. And when Castro kind of took over, your mom and dad came here to South Florida, where you and your brother settled in. Now you're married, you're raising a family here. What got you interested in the political arena, which is probably next to show business? Wow, it's a rough place to be, and they don't play using wiffle balls.
Well, I have a very confusing family history, so I'm going to have to correct you on that, but I don't blame
Okay.
you for getting it confused because it is very, very interesting. My father was born in 1920 in Kentucky, and he was the world's greatest yo-yo player. In fact, he had a patent on mass producing yo-yos in the 50s, and he traveled the world playing yo-yo and teaching kids how to play yo-yos. And that's where he met my mother, who was the yo-yo champion of Japan. She was the best yo-yo player in Japan.
That's amazing.
And the two of them traveled the world. She became my yo-yo ma. That's my I gotta laugh. I knew that would get somebody. That's the worst dad joke ever. But I was born in Doctors Hospital in Coral Gables, actually, here in Congressional District 27. And I was raised in the Gables, the Grove, and on Key Biscayne. And that's where I grew up. Before my father met my mother in the 60s, in a previous marriage, while still working and selling yo-yos, he was working and living in Havana for 10 years, where he was teaching kids how to play yo-yo, and he's working with clients like Coca-Cola and Pilon Coffee. And he was there right until the regime came up, took all of his assets on the island, seized his assets, froze the bank accounts, kicked him off the island. And he settled back in Key Biscayne, where he also helped exiles as they were leaving Cuba and finding their halfway house on their way into society here. And so my story actually came after I joined his yo-yo business. I left that and went into the water sports industry. Won't go into that wave, but it definitely taught me to swim with sharks.
Sure.
But in front of my house was a contaminated park. I made it all the way through my 40s without touching politics or law or land use or any of this world that is so unattractive to most.
Right.
And it's a shame because it should attract more good people that would be in politics that don't think that they belong there or wouldn't want to do it to themselves or their family. I got dragged into it because of a contaminated park in front of my house. I took on the city. I organized the neighborhood. I learned all of the science of remediation and contamination. And I fought to make sure the city cleaned up that park correctly for our kids in our neighborhood. There were 5 other contaminated parks in the city of Miami. I decided to run for local office. And that was my start into this rabbit hole of politics.
Yeah, and it can be a rabbit hole. As I told you on the phone, I've worked for a president, a governor, I worked for an attorney general, and I know how politics can be. I don't, it's like somebody said to me, if you had your choice between working with a theatrical agent, being in politics, or dating a rattlesnake, what would you take? I said, the rattlesnake, because at least I know I stand a chance. I know I stand a chance. You have been a proponent of equal rights for every human being on this planet, from the LGB to people of ethnic backgrounds, different ethnic backgrounds, because let's face it, Miami is a melting pot. Rick's own wife is originally from Cuba, if I remember Martha. It's originally from Cuba. We have people from Central America, South America, people from Asia, people from Europe. It's a melting pot. And you, Commissioner, have been a proponent of equal rights for everybody when it came to housing, when it comes to pay, when it comes to everything. Is that probably the gold standard upon which you go by to help and assist and make South Florida better by making our lives better?
I had no idea that would be my mission, if I'm honest. It's not that I was a crusader.
Michael Miller, our illustrious leader, says hello.
Hey, Michael. It's funny when you stumble into things and you don't even realize what you're going to become a champion for. That contamination that was in the park in front of my home, once I started digging to find out where it came from, it was from an incinerator in the West Grove called Old Smoky. And the city, for 50 years had burned all of its garbage in the poor neighborhoods. And not only would that ash rain down on those neighborhoods, creating cancer clusters, but the ash that was the residual ash was then carted off and dumped into the empty spaces that became our city parks. That was what led me to the West Grove. Long before politics, I was chasing that contamination, and I joined the Old Smoky Steering Committee. And I realized what a neighborhood of need goes through when they don't have the political voice to make sure that they're getting equal treatment. In their case, even from a sanitary and health perspective. And so as I was knocking doors, just running for office, it's a very large district that includes Coconut Grove, Brickell, downtown, all the way up to Morningside, but a lot of affluence. And as I would knock on these market rate neighborhood doors, I would hear about issues about peacocks and potholes, and that's a standard city commission stuff. And I was looking forward to working on that. But when I knocked on doors in West Coconut Grove, that's when I heard stories of, I don't know if I'm going to be able to live here 2 years from now, afford the rent. Neighbors are the new neighbors that are moving in are attacking us with code enforcement violations and then offering to buy out our properties once they're leaned.
Right.
The infrastructure was subpar. The gentrification and displacement. This neighborhood has a concrete wall around it, out of which African-American residents weren't allowed to leave after sunset in the early days of Miami. Wow. They were there because the West Grove community was a Bahamian enclave of folks that were building Miami. And they wanted the people for the work, but they didn't need the land. Now they want the land, but they don't want the people. And so I realized once I won office, I have a very unique position and ability, which gives me a responsibility to help level that playing field.
Sure.
And I think there's a debt owed to that community, a reparation, if you will. And that's been a huge thing for me. This week, we're actually renaming at City Commission, if the votes are there, the West Grove will become Little Bahamas of Coconut Grove.
Oh, that's
and
cool.
We're bringing in millions of dollars from the federal government and matching locally to build a Bahamian cultural museum. And then we've created a community redevelopment agency, a CRA, which will surround that neighborhood with $500 million for affordable housing over the next 30 years. This is the debt that was owed to that community. And I was able to do this with the will of my fellow commissioners over the last 7 years. And I'm very proud of it. It showed me what can be done very easily with a little bit of political will from someone who wasn't even in the system.
Yeah. Is the inflation, do you see it coming to some sort of an end? Now, Janet Yellen a week ago said, look, she was wrong. This is going to continue on for a while. The president has said that there's nothing much he can do about inflation. Gas prices keep rising. Food prices keep rising. Rent prices. You and I discussed that yesterday, Commissioner, over the phone about how rental prices, mortgage prices, everything is going on. And Rick, you see that right there in your own neighborhood, because I wanted to move into the same complex where you are, and it became impossible and tenable for me to do that at this particular time. Where do you see this situation going? Is it going to level off as supply and demand sort of balances out, or where do you see it going?
Well, you've got two basic tracks here. There's the reality of the economy, both national and globally, but then you also have the political path, which is the unfortunate one, because the economic situation is being weaponized to divide us and try to get other groups into power. Now, anyone who is watching our global economy is recognizing we're going through global inflation. And certainly to say that a president has power over gas prices in our country, well, they certainly have no power over gas prices in other countries. To look at the global situation right now, we have a perfect storm, which has led to this inflation. Not only the pandemic, which coming out of which people had savings and they were having extra money to spend. There was a run on the demand was increased, but supply was decreased by that same squeeze that was led by the pandemic and the supply chain globally. Now, hopefully that levels out. But I think that the increased prices we're seeing in things is a new paradigm. And the real solution to that is going to be increased wages and salaries. And that will create a new normal for what things cost when you can afford them. You know, that price of the cup of coffee may go up, but if your salary did too as well, you'll be all right.
Yeah. But what do you see as far as now, Rick? I haven't talked to you about rental prices where you're living now because I'm not ready to move yet. But do you see an increase in the community that you live and Commissioner? Do you see increases continuing, or do you see in this next 6 months to a year things leveling off?
Well, I'll answer part of that and turn the rest over to the Commissioner. Just the other day, a gentleman called me. He's one of my hobbies is magic. I know you know that. I don't know if the Commissioner does. And this guy's a fellow magician. He's retired in poor health. And he asked me to come get his magic, try to sell it for him, and I'm working on that. But the reason I'm bringing it up, he's living over in West Kendall, and he's paying rent there. And they said they're going to raise his rent $300 at the end of the year in October. So he's looking for a place to move. And that leads me to one of the things that really interests me is about the micro units. Have these been built? Are
Yes.
they being built, and where are they being built?
Yes, I passed micro unit legislation in the city of Miami several years ago, and that allowed, we had a minimum square footage that was required for any unit.
Right.
And I really realized that I believe the market can decide what is
Yeah.
appropriate for a
Sure.
square foot unit. If you start to make something that's, not serviceable and not wanted, people
They're not gonna
won't
do
rent it. But the timing was right, because we don't have horizontal development space left in Miami-Dade County.
Right.
Vertical and density is the only way forward. And there is an argument for organic affordability through density, like the supply and demand. The more units there are, the prices will start to normalize. But it's not enough. The demand will far outweigh the supply in South Florida because it's such a desirable place, not only from our tax code, but our weather, our business, everything is driving people here, and we cannot keep up with the supply side. So we need to put a finger on the scale as well to make sure that our community remains affordable. And affordable housing, I will say it right now, is the #1 crisis for the voters that I'm going to be speaking to over this next 5 months.
Sure.
They want to know what's going to happen. And you used to be able to run to the suburbs and commute. And as much of a nightmare as that is, there's no place to run anymore. The rent is too damn high.
Where are these units being built, Commissioner?
The first recipient of micro units was in Brickell, actually, right next to public transit and the Underline. And so we're encouraging more of that. We're actually examining co-living at this point in our code. It's not currently allowed, but I'm studying an amendment to the code that would allow for co-living, where you have, shared common rooms that make actually construction more efficient. And it's not for everybody. This is for a younger professional, most likely single crowd. But we have a lot of that moving into Miami with the new business and tech industry.
Right, exactly. You're listening to Main Street. Gary Allen with you, along with Rick Del Vecchio, the executive producer of this show, and also Commissioner Ken Russell, who is running for the Congressional District 27, answering questions for you this afternoon. We thank you and welcome you all very much to the program of Main Street. We're on at 2 o'clock every Tuesday afternoon. Commissioner, I know that besides the economy, I know the environment is a major thing for you. I know that we talked about the flooding in South Florida, and I know with that tropical wave that went through there over the weekend. Talk about some of the economic impacts of that and what you're going to be doing as far as helping with the environment. And you can't control Mother Nature, but I understand certain parts of South Beach flood every afternoon.
Absolutely. And one of the symptoms of overdevelopment is when your infrastructure doesn't keep up with the demand of who's moving in. If you're getting new towers, but you're increasing the number of parks and flood basins and outfalls, et cetera, you don't feel that overdevelopment. But when suddenly you create a concrete canyon with nowhere for the water to go and the infrastructure hasn't been improved, then you're stuck. Then you've got a problem. And as people do continue to move to South Florida, we must address this in a big way. I was the chairman of the Downtown Development Authority for a few years. And one of my first initiatives was to address sea level rise. And this group of titans of industry in South Florida's development community did not want to talk about it at the time, because they were worried we were going to send a negative signal about what's going on in Miami. But the truth is, if we bury our heads in the sand and don't address the issue, their properties will soon be uninsurable if we're not taking the right steps to shore up against storm surge and sea level rise. So I spent the first 3 years of my tenure here at the city passing the Miami Forever General Obligation Bond. I had to get it on the ballot through my commission. It took me 2 years to do that, and I had to campaign so the voters understood what they were voting for. We created $400 million for resilience in the city of Miami without raising taxes $1. Wow. And now we've got that money available for not only the plumbing side of resilience, and we've done a stormwater master plan to replumb the entire city of Miami, but also the human side of resilience, which is $100 million for affordable housing. Cool. Now, the biggest thing was I had no help from the state or federal government to do this. It was like a magician, like Rick, trying to create money without increasing taxes. And that's really what I'd like to be in the federal government, is what I wish I had for the last 7 years in Congress, is somebody who's helping leverage the right resources to tackle the big problems that cities can't face on their own.
If you are elected, do you see a problem? Because they say that in this midterm, it's going to be a red wave, and the Republicans are going to take over, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not saying which side of the fence I'm on, but I mean, is it harder and harder for the party who's not in power to get anything done in a Congress that, frankly, even with the Democrats in charge, is stalemated? They can't even get anything done with gun control, which we will get to a little bit later on. But what would you like to accomplish that
Well,
you've already accomplished and continue to work hard for the people of South Florida if elected the congressman for the 27th district?
Well, I've passed more legislation than anyone in my primary and my general election combined. In the city of Miami, which services 500,000 people and a $1.3 billion budget, I've passed legislation for the environment, for police oversight, for affordable housing, for good government transparency. And I've done that while in the minority this entire time. There's only 2 Democrats on the City of Miami Commission. The city's gerrymandered to always have 3 conservative Republicans. And even though we are sitting in nonpartisan seats, that idea that we're in municipal government in a nonpartisan seat to get things done, we leave the party off the sleeve and we work together. We fight a lot, and it's never pretty in the city of Miami, but we get the work done. And I'd like to bring a bit of that. And I certainly wish it was almost required to go through local government before you run for state and federal, where you just become part of a team and a tribe.
Yeah.
Because accomplishment is what our voters really want. They're really sick of the gridlock, and they really want to see forward motion on things like what I've done here in the city of Miami. And that's why I'm doing it. If I really believed I was stepping into gridlock, I wouldn't even do it. But to your other point about a potential red wave, traditionally, yes, after a president wins power of a certain party, the midterm right after that is usually a swing back in the other direction. And I think Republicans had that in their advantage in their court for a while, but they have taken such extreme positions on everything from guns to LGBT to women's rights to even just what's taught in schools. They're making so many single issue voter enemies out there. I wonder what's going to happen in this midterm. But I'll tell you what, this one seat that I'm running for is being looked at as the greatest potential for a flip Republican to Democrat seat in the entire country. Not only are Democrats just trying to hold on to seats for this midterm, this is one we can actually win back from a very vulnerable freshman GOP congresswoman who has very little to show in her district for the last couple of years.
Yeah. And you're right. I think the American people, I don't care if you have an R or a D by your name or an I for independence near your name. I think the American people just want a government that works for us, and often and too often we rely on this, we rely on that, we rely on, and it's so stalemated. I mean, it's like you're talking about local government being stagnant. Just go to Washington, D.C. and watch how it takes months and months and months. And I was there to get anything done. And if you're not part of the party of power, it sometimes never gets there. But I have confidence that I think things are eventually going to straighten out. I really, really do. There's one thing that I want to go back on, and that's with the climate change. And that was the Clean Power Act with the EPA that you were able to get through. Talk about that.
That was one of the very first things I passed when I first got into office. It was just a simple resolution encouraging the federal government to stay on track with these initiatives and these benchmarks. But I realized resolutions of support don't go very far. I needed to change the City of Miami code if we're going to really address a climate crisis. So with the help of the mayor and my fellow commissioners, we passed a series of ordinances. The first thing we did was we declared a climate emergency. And this is something a lot of cities have been hesitant to do, and I don't know why. It's not a partisan issue, but to say that we are facing a climate emergency is no exaggeration. Number 2, then, is what do you do about it? You've got to measure where you stand right now. So and you have to set goals. So we set a goal to be carbon neutral by 2050. And to get there, I passed the most aggressive benchmarking and retuning legislation in the entire state of Florida. I tried to one-up whatever cities had already taken on some of this. Orlando was probably the closest. But what that means is you measure all of the towers in your city that are over 20,000 square feet for their efficiency on electricity and water. You measure them every year. And then you have a requirement that they invest in retuning and improving their efficiency score every 3 years. Now, the way I got that passed on my conservative dais is not by putting it on their shoulders. The improvements that they have to invest in, whether it's energy efficiencies, new roofs, different types of HVAC systems, whatever it is, to conserve water and electricity, have to self-liquidate their costs within just a few years. Meaning that not only will their investment be completely wiped out, they'll be profitable on the money they're saving by being more efficient in time to come. So I got it passed, and it's a way that Miami's actually getting it on track to improve its efficiency scores.
Okay, now I have a question.
Yes.
Gary, I have a question.
Okay.
How did you learn all this coming from a surfboard manufacturer salesman?
Yeah, I mean, I don't pretend to be an expert in any one of these fields, but if I listen to those who are, I just have to be a good policymaker and find the legislation and use best practices from other cities and get the votes done. So every time I try to pass legislation like this, I sound like an expert in it. But that's only because I've newly studied up on what other cities have done. I listen to the experts within science and policy, and I bring forward legislation that I know I can get passed. That's another thing. You don't bring something just for a headline that you know is going to get knocked down or challenged in court. And so I sound like I know what I'm talking about, but it's all an illusion. I'm just kidding.
No,
it's all politics,
but
right?
Going back to a moment ago about the polarization at a federal government level, and I don't expect you to know the answer to it, but you might. Why? I mean, and when did it happen? I mean, the last time I think things really got done between the two parties was Clinton and Gingrich, and then before
it's worse than ever, isn't it?
It's worse than ever.
Yeah.
And I think, and I don't think it sounds funny, but I don't believe there's as many friends in Washington between Democrats and Republicans. You know, they don't golf together, they don't hang out together, because it's a lot easier to say no to a friend than it is to somebody that you never hang out with. And I don't know if that's a fact or not, but it could be an issue. But it's just how did it get to this point where you have the right and the left, and that's it? And
they have found more success in division than unity. And you've heard that negative campaigning is effective, and it is. If they can use emotional wedge issues to divide us and get us to vote against our own interests, they maintain power. So it's going to be up to the voters to really realize what they're voting on and what they care about. Now, in the issue of climate, for example, yes, there's been a natural division right and left, and I don't know why. But when I bring it up, I talk about plumbing, not polar bears. And if that makes sense, everyone looks at the sunny day flooding in our streets, and there's no party that can deny it exists.
Right.
And the residents want to know, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
Now, if I stay off of the conversation of what's causing it, and I say, how are we going to deal with it? How are we going to mitigate it? How are we going to invest in it?
Sense.
I can find positive ground. And so I think choosing the people that are across the table from you, bring them around to the side of the table you're sitting on, and work together to solve the issue. And being very patient and measuring your rhetoric is also another way to do that.
The only thing on a national level, once you get up to the big boys, with the polarization that already exists, do you think it's going to be a lot tougher to do that? I mean, possibly not. I mean, but I mean, the way you explain it right now, I'm a Republican, and I looked at your website, and a lot of things you say there, I agree 100% with. And again, you got the far right, you got the far left. I think you got to start a new party called the Common Sense Party.
There you go.
And that might, you bring the people in the middle together and go after the issues and not argue about, like you said, what's causing it.
Well, they say that primaries breed extreme candidates because you have to lean toward your party in the primary. And then, you're supposed to go back to the center in the general. And I don't believe in that. I don't believe in diluting my position as a Democrat by going to the center. What I believe is taking on issues that we all agree on. Housing, water quality. Find me anyone of any party that's going to tell me we don't need either of those in South Florida. And
you know what, if I can interrupt just for a second, you know what the people care about? How am I going to put food on the table? How am I going to pay my bills? How am I going to pay my rent? How am I going to get my car paid for? I'm just going to repeat something that was said to me. I've said it to Rick a number of times. When we took Nixon from Washington, D.C. back to California, he talked to all of us on board Air Force One. And I remember him saying to me, because I said to him, where's the faith-based people going to go? He said, Gary, whatever party the faith-based people go to, that party is going to be doomed in the long run. And he said, but I'm also going to tell you something else about politicians, if you don't already know it. We're full of crap. We tell you what we want to tell you, so you'll hear it. We'll get elected. We do as we damn well please. And that's what's been going on since Nixon. They get in there, they feel the power, they feel the ego, and they won't let it go. Number one thing that needs to be done, and Commissioner, and I believe this with all my heart, and Rick agrees with me on this. I know he does. Most people do. Term limits.
Happily.
I mean, we've got Mitch
Happily,
McConnell in there. And is Mitch McConnell the next step going to have a heart attack? Nancy Pelosi. I mean, they've been there since the day I was born. You know, I mean, it's time. I don't think our founding fathers wanted politicians. I mean, most of our founding fathers, if I'm incorrect, please correct me, Commissioner, but most of our founding fathers, did they not serve 1 or 2 terms and then went home?
Well, what they underestimated was the power of incumbency when a ruling like Citizens United allows unlimited corporate donations. And so I don't think the founding fathers, they expected one of the checks and balances to be the voters to hold folks accountable and kick them out if they were doing wrong. But if they can amass so much funds as an incumbent, it's very hard to unseat them. It's very hard for someone to come in and take out even a non-performing senator, just because of their simple ability to advertise their name and whatever message they want during a campaign.
Yeah, I think so. What do you envision? I just want to remind everybody you're watching Main Street. Gary Allen with you, Rick Del Vecchio, along with Commissioner Ken Russell, who's running for Congress in the 27th district. Hope you get out. And whatever you vote for, Democrat or Republican, please vote. Guys like me and other service personnel, we fought for this country so you could vote. Don't take that vote lightly. I think that's another thing too, Commissioner, that drives me crazy. Oh, I was too busy to go and vote. And then they complain about the type of government they get. Vote. Use what this country was founded on, the right to vote. I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, vote. And vote for the people that you agree with, that makes sense to you. And I think our country would be a little better off if other people took that right to heart and voted. I think there should be a holiday for every election, whether it be state, local, or national. That day should be a holiday that people get off and go and vote.
It is, isn't it? Don't they get off on election day?
Nope.
No.
There's no requirement to allow paid vacation or time off for voting.
And people are being restricted from voting hours and days now as it is.
Sure.
Yeah. Well,
Sure.
I've been voting ever since I've been old enough to vote, and it wasn't going to be that way. I was sitting at Madden's Pub in Long Island. Tommy Madden, Democrat, Irishman, bar owner, and he says, "Well, Rick, you're going to register. You're going to vote?" I said, "It's not worth it." And he looked at me. I won't say what he said exactly, but he says, he goes, "If you don't vote, you don't have a right to complain." And he's 100% right. That's how you complain, by voting. Vote for the person you think is going to do the best job.
Yeah.
It's that simple. And although you got to admit, we've had a record number of people vote the last election, 160 million or something like that.
Yeah. And they're still arguing over it all the way around. When it comes to the number one priority, if elected, what is it for you, Commissioner?
Well, for me, there's 2 issues that are very big with this district, with this state, with this country, and affordable housing and water quality are those 2. And my plan on both of those is pretty simple. The Housing and Urban Development, the HUD, that sends funds down through the state and local governments is a mess. I've experienced this as a local commissioner. I will create funds, find land, build projects without touching federal money because of all that bureaucracy and restriction that keeps these projects from being what they could be for the community. I'd like to fix that. And I think it's good intention that's not thought out to the end level.
Right.
And if somebody's willing to dig in deep and figure out exactly how to make that money flexible enough so that local municipalities can deploy it quickly and appropriately, it's going to make a huge difference on affordable housing throughout the country. The other thing with clean water, that's supposed to be regulated by the federal government under the Clean Water Act, the EPA. Very simple, broad legislation that has been ceded to the state of Florida legislators. They are compromised by agriculture. And so nothing happens to really hold polluters accountable in the state of Florida. And it's our greatest asset. And whatever corner of the state you're in, Manatees are dying in the Indian River.
Yeah.
You know, Piney Point and red tide on the West Coast, the Everglades and Lake Okeechobee and blue-green algae, et cetera. It all comes down to common denominators of nutrients and pollutants in the water that need to be regulated and held accountable.
And the fertilizer and people fertilizing their lawns, and it's running into the creeks, it's running into the sewers, it then eventually gets out into up where I am in Palm Bay. And Rick, I don't think you've ever been up this way, but you know, going east of me is the Indian River Canal thing, and where the manatees are. And I don't know why people don't like manatees. I think they're the cutest little things in the whole wide world. I dated a manatee for 6
Who
months.
doesn't like a manatee? Who are you talking about?
Yeah.
Everybody
I remember when I was a little boy, my dad took me and my mom and all my siblings. We went to the aquarium, which is not far from where you folks are at the moment.
Yep.
And I remember saying to my dad, "What's that?" He said, "Well, it's called a sea cow, but it's called a manatee." And I petted this little thing, and it was the most beautiful thing in the world. I mean, I don't understand people hurting animals with all of that. I want to talk now, if we could. We've got about 20 some minutes left. And I want to talk about the elephant in the room for the last 3 weeks, 2 years, 10 years. And that's the senseless gun violence that is going on in this country. The Texas governor today and yesterday said now it's mandatory for school officers, patrol officers, to take gun training. I believe in red flag laws. I believe the laws that are on the books that are no longer working well should be done away with, and we need to get some new ones. I believe in a 10 to 15 day period. If Ken Russell decides to go in and buy a gun, I think no matter who you are, you need to wait 10 to 15 days. The gunman in Oklahoma, if I'm wrong, please correct me, didn't he buy the gun the same day that he used it last week?
I'm not sure about that, but I'll tell you one thing that's interesting. 45% of online gun purchases have no background check whatsoever. And that's according to Gifford's gun laws. It's crazy. It's nuts. Again, like I said, I'm a Republican, but I'm not an idiot. You know, I think now this is where it gets a little crazy. The Medical Information Bureau. I sold life insurance, and this Medical Information Bureau has been around forever. They got records on health records for everybody. And I know it's a touchy subject to go into somebody's health records, but let's face it, these people that are going into these schools killing it, they're deranged. I mean, nobody wakes up in the morning and say, "Oh, let me go kill a bunch of kids," except somebody with a loose screw in their head.
Yeah.
I know there's going to be a lot of flack on this one, but part of a gun check, I think, should be medical records, where if somebody, and it's done, the records are done by the NCIS, the federal government, it could stay confidential, but you go into there and they find out, oh, his health insurance says they're paying for like 10 visits to a psychiatrist's office. They should be able to ask that psychiatrist, does this guy have suicidal tendencies, violent tendencies? Would you think he should have a gun? And, you know, with no repercussions to the doctor, they should be able to give an answer to that. And then don't allow that person to have a gun.
Yeah. I mean, and I think the age of 21 before you can buy a gun.
I agree
The guy in Texas bought 2 AR-15s, Commissioner, within 3 days, plus 400 rounds of ammunition. I don't know if he went to the same gun dealer or not. I have no way of knowing. But my God, when is enough enough? I mean, you're not part of that. But when is enough enough? And when does enough people turn around and say, enough of me taking money from the NRA? This has got to stop. We're killing each other. Since the thing in Texas, there's been, 19 other shootings in the last 10 days?
But
Commissioner, what do you want to do? What do you want to see?
The arguments that keep us in a state of inaction are a shame. It's, again, that divisive conversation of mental health versus gun accessibility. And I think we can look at it holistically.
Yeah.
But one thing you can definitely say is there are global issues within mental health and drug abuse.
Sure.
But there is a very unique factor within the United States, and that is the easy access to high capacity, high power weapons. And that needs to be addressed. It must be addressed. And if a majority of our voters, if this is truly a democracy, and a majority of our voters want to see us bring in these sorts of reforms that'll protect our children, why are the electeds sitting in inaction or even opposition to anything? And that comes down to the special interests of the National Rifle Association. Fortunately, though, I think they're starting to lose their cold, dead grip on the politicians of this country as they're having their own internal issues. And maybe that'll start to have an effect. But until elected officials are willing to have the spine to stand up and say, I'm going to make hard decisions to protect my community without obliterating the Constitution, without violating anyone's rights, and without taking all your guns away, but coming up with common sense gun reform that is wanted and needed. For sure. It should be a simple decision, if I'm honest. And I think, again, it's going to come down to the voters. And this may be a single issue vote for many people in this country this year, and that may have an effect on this midterms. And it goes
it's amazing. Every time that somebody says, well, we need to strengthen this law against gun control, the first thing that the NRA people do, and listen, there's a lot of members of NRA that are friends of mine that say we need to have stronger gun control laws, and the ones that aren't working, let's do away with them. And there needs to be background checks. But the number one thing that some of these propagandists come up with on both sides, who they go, well, they're going to take away our guns. Nobody wants to take away your guns. But let me be honest with you. I fought in a war. Okay. I had an M16. Mostly it was a 45 near my side. I only drew it once, and that was almost to kill one of our own soldiers who saluted me in a combat zone. Okay? What do you need an AR-15 for if you're a hunter? If you need an AR-15 to bring down a deer, you got more problems than just hunt. You got problems. Native Americans were doing it with bows and arrows. Nobody wants to take away your guns. And they all go back to the Second Amendment. But you know what? I remember in a biography that I read about Thomas Jefferson, who wrote all of this, who said, every so often we need to take a look at the Constitution and the amendments and say, where are we as a country? Maybe this needs to be critiqued a little bit. Maybe this needs to be done. Yes, when the Second Amendment came along, there were no police departments. There were no sheriff's departments. We were worried about the British government or any other government coming over here and taking our right to live and coming in and barging in our homes. We don't have that so much anymore. I mean, it does happen from time to time with the police departments, wrong entry, et cetera, et cetera. But we need to critique some of these amendments, not only the second, but others.
Well, Garrett, one thing I want to touch or ask the commissioner about. Sure. 54% of gun deaths are suicide. And in your website, you talk about suicide prevention initiatives. Do you have any ideas on what that would entail and what we can do to help? Because let's face it, it's huge. 24,292 people committed suicide in 2020 with guns.
Yes, and if they did not have such easy access to those guns, those numbers might be lower. Right. And as you said, and it's complicated how to get to that end result. But if you're able to keep the guns out of the hands of folks that have mental instability and should not have those weapons, you would certainly see a decrease in those numbers.
Right.
Yeah, it's a terrible situation. I don't know what it's going to eventually take for this country to wake up. Majority of the American people, I think, over 70%, Commissioner, are for gun control of some kind. What
rock bottom do we have to hit? I mean, when you see children dying in such high numbers and so many instances, this is not lone cases. This is now an epidemic. That we have to look at from a health perspective. If more kids are dying from gun death than anything else in this country right now, we need to recognize that action must be taken. Now, another shooting isn't what's going to get us to that political decision.
What about hardening of the schools? I mean, the security. As you know, every federal building has a metal detector and armed guards. It's an inconvenience, and again, a metal detector won't do it either because kids walk through with metal, but they do have these detectors like at the airport to detect gunpowder. You put those in, it's going to be expensive, but what's more expensive, to save 19 or 20 lives? Put something like that, have one entrance, and then you have video surveillance where every other door that's locked from the outside, but of course for fire purposes could open easily, and every door could be monitored by one guy sitting in a room. It's sad that we came to this, but that would eliminate a lot of it. Because
hardening of schools, mental health funding, all these things, even Democrats would support, but not at the expense of inaction on gun reform. I think altogether, if you look at it holistically, and you make your schools safer, you make your mental health access better, and you make it harder for people to get high power, high capacity weapons, then you will see a true result. But the problem is we say, well, why don't we do this instead of that? Or if we do this, we don't have to do that.
Have to do a little bit of everything.
Exactly.
Yeah. The two things that I don't agree with about hardening schools would be giving teachers guns. Okay. Unless, like the gentleman I ran into this morning when I went to the shop, is a former Ranger, and he's an Army Ranger, and I know him well. If he was a teacher and he carried a 45, I'd be pretty confident he would know what to do with it. But my little old math teacher back in the day when I was going to Hollywood Hills High School, I wouldn't trust her with a gun because she'll panic. And there's another argument too. They say, well, why make the rule at 21 years of age when 18-year-olds are in the military? Yes, but they're trained how to use those weapons.
And Gar,
yeah,
my answer to that would be, if somebody enlists in the military at 17 or 18 and spends a year or two in there and they're trained to use a weapon, they get a good conduct discharge, we could make an exception. If they want to be a hunter and buy a gun, I'd approve that guy. Yeah, you have to have exceptions to every rule. It's not.
But there are certain things that there needs to be certain standards. And I think the problem is that there are a lot of laws on the books. And Commissioner, I think you'll agree with this. There's a lot of laws on the books. But here's the other problem too, guys. Like what happened in Texas. The one hand wasn't communicating with the other. Yeah. The guy who was the police chief for the school district didn't even have a walkie-talkie or a radio or anything else to know what was going on. And many, many times, the schools will know that this student is not right in his mind, or she's not right in her mind, but they're afraid to report it to anybody because they don't want to get themselves involved. That's the other aspect of it. People don't want to get involved. That's somebody else's problem, is what you usually hear. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I think that's what, Commissioner, you probably hear more often than anything else, whether it's gun control or another issue. Oh, I don't want to get involved. It's somebody else's problem.
I don't think we have that choice anymore. I really do think it affects all of us. If you have kids that go to school, you realize that I have two daughters that are in elementary level. And I remember there was a code red, they call it, when they do a lockdown because of a situation. Yeah. And at the time, my daughters thought it was a drill, but it wasn't. My position in the city, I learned exactly what had happened. Wow. And there was a concern from the police from an incident on the street. The school went into lockdown. And when I saw my daughter after school, she said, "Daddy, I didn't think I'd see you ever again."
Wow.
But she said it in such a matter-of-fact way that this is like her new reality. It wasn't a big dramatic moment.
That's sad, yeah.
It's very sad. And as a parent, if you don't realize that this is not something we grew up with, a need for this. No. This is like a fire drill or a hurricane drill. It's now gun drills for them is as natural as going to lunch. And it shouldn't be that way. So the will must be there. The will must be there for the children to take action. And I've been working with people like Fred Guttenberg, people like Manuel Oliver, who lost their children in Parkland. And when you listen to folks like that, there is no way to stay on the sidelines. You must find a way to take action, find that consensus, get those votes moved forward, and get reform on the epidemic of gun violence.
You figured after Sandy Hook and Parkland and a few others in between that both sides who would wake up, but they don't. I don't know. The only time I ever heard code red in my life was in the Air Force. When we were going somewhere on Air Force One, there was a complete lockdown of Andrews Air Force Base. That was the only time I ever heard of code red, before and since. Now it's like you said, every day in the school somewhere in this country, there's a lockdown going on. And it's a shame because we have parents who don't seem to care. They think the teachers are going to be the babysitters. We have people who are teachers who are supposed to be worried about the students, who are afraid to say anything to anybody. It is, and as you said, Commissioner, we can't live like that anymore. We can't just not communicate with each other anymore. Commissioner, we got a few minutes left, and there's one thing that I need to do for Rick before we go. But you as a commissioner, and we're going to have you back. I can pretty much guarantee that. But talk to the people about running for Congress, what you want to do for South Florida, and how much this means to you, your family, and to all of us to have you in the right seat.
Well, thank you for this opportunity. I've gotten to know Rick over the last 7 years.
Yeah.
We have some very similar passions when it comes to Japanese gardens
Right.
and collectible yo-yos.
Yes.
I used to do a little magic back in my day.
Did
as
you
well.
really?
We won't get into that now.
Great.
But for me, I'm an optimist. And you see a lot of people leaving government right now. They say it's worse than it's ever been. Generationally, they've had it with this where we are in terms of the rhetoric between the parties and just the divisiveness that's even hitting our own family Thanksgivings and tables, right? It's dividing families and friends. I would not rather be anywhere else right now, but in a position of policymaking. And I experienced that as a city commissioner, as low that position is, the ability to make a difference on people's lives at a crucial time when we're having a pandemic or after a hurricane. There's nothing more fulfilling to be able to do that. And there's nothing worse than to feel like your hands are tied, but only your vote every 4 years could make that difference.
Right.
And so if I can get in and be part of that next generation of leadership that brings us away from this divisiveness and toward accomplishment again, get back to civil discourse. That's what I want to be a part of. And I have to be an optimist or I wouldn't do this. I'm a small business owner. I'd have plenty of fun taking care of my family, going back to growing my own business. But I really believe in this country and its ability to be everything that it should be because of our checks and balances, because of our system. I'm a pure optimist in that sense, and I'm very hopeful. And I know it's needed for this district. I know it's needed for the cities that have not had that federal partner that I would like to be. So I've got a great plan that I need to just communicate with residents over the next 5 months. I won my first race with no name recognition or budget, just knocking doors, running against incumbent powers with millions of dollars. And I intend to do exactly that same thing now. I have raised, in this case, $1.4 million for a congressional race. I have got 5 labor endorsements, 13 elected officials have endorsed my race. And we have a plan now in staff to knock on 150,000 doors over the next 5 months, just like I did when I first ran for office.
I remember doing that. I remember canvassing from one. Boy, I was thin. I had a nice tan. I was when I used to canvass. I'd say my heart was in great shape canvassing. I wish I lived down there for you, Commissioner, because I would canvass for you. I'll be honest with you. I would canvass for you. I'd go out there and I'd
in shape. I call it the grassroots diet. How to lose 15 pounds and change your community. I'm going to.
Oh, you could lose 15 pounds in no time at all. And I got to tell you something. When you're canvassing, it's a lot of fun. Now I know next to stuffing envelopes, it's the grassroots of what a campaign is. But I wish you well, and I know you're going to come back with us. I know that Rick is going to be calling me on that, and I really want to have you back. And even if you get elected, I want you to be part of this program because this program is part of Miami and what makes Miami tick. And I thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to join us this afternoon, Commissioner. But before everybody goes, I have to first of all say this: that Ricky Ticky, my boy Ricky D, aka Rick Del Vecchio, has a magic and lecture show going on this Saturday, June 11th at 3:30. Tell them where and when and how they get there.
It's the South Miami Coral Gables Elks Lodge, which is at 6304 Southwest 78th Street. And it starts at 3:30, and it's free to the general public. We're advertising this on Culture Shock Miami. We donated tickets to another show. I'll get into that. But it's free. And basically, it's on the history of the art of magic. And I don't have the whole verbiage in front of me, but boy, I'm going to get screwed. It's made in part by a grant from the City of Miami Cultural Affairs Council, the city commissioners, and the county commissioner, I guess, and the mayor. Oh boy, did I mess up that disclaimer? But
and Sid Bergens, IBM Ring 45, and and it's and by the way, Commissioner, it's a lodge that I am soon going to be joining. We're not sure how I'm going to be joining, but I'm going to be joining the lodge before too long. It's going to be something. But Commissioner, I thank you so very much, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. I've been around politicians a good part of my life, as Rick will tell you. I enjoy a good conversation. And again, I hope you'll come back. I hope you'll let us have the opportunity to have you back. And when I get home, I will be one of the first to congratulate you on winning your congressional seat. And this will be an open invitation to you anytime you want to come on and talk to the people of Miami. I know I'm not Channel 10. I know I'm not Channel 4, but I am Main Street with Gary Allen. And I'll give you the platform anytime you need it.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity. I definitely will be back.
And I want to thank all of you out there very much. First of all, let me thank my executive producer, Mr. Rick Del Vecchio, sitting there. My studio producer, Andres, who started off the show. Michael, he's in there now. Michael and Grant Miller, so much for giving us this platform and allowing us to bring a lot of hosts, different guests on. Also, my community sponsors, the Japanese Garden of Miami, the Elks Lodges of Miami. And I want to thank all of you very, very much. Next week, we have our monthly Elks show coming on at 2 p.m. next Tuesday. And would you please do me a favor, take care of yourselves and each other. Until then, this is Gary Allen from Main Street. See you then.